During the 70s and 80s, the US developed a keen interest in astral projection and remote viewing. This fascination was sparked by reports that the Soviets were exploring and achieving success in these areas. Consequently, the US decided to pursue similar endeavors, trying to surpass those achievements. So we're going to jump into the documents, but first, are we all on the same page? Do we know what remote viewing is? So like you close your eyes, you try to sense something that's far away, like a hidden object or distant place. You're not actually there and you're not using your regular senses, like sight, hearing, and touch, solely using your mind. So now that we got that out of the way, this is Joseph. He was a prominent remote viewer for the CIA. He was actually known as Remote Viewer Number 1. These documents that I'm about to read is specifically pertaining to him and his abilities. He was highly regarded for his skills. So he was at the Monroe Institute where he had been resting in an industrial cube, and that's when the Department of the Army assigned him this session. Joseph was tasked with remote viewing Mars. He was handed an index card that was sealed inside of an envelope. Inside the envelope read, "The planet Mars. In time of interest, approximately 1 million years BC." Without reading the envelope, he relied on his senses. So he began his session. He described starting with the vision of an enormous pyramid. The first words out of his mouth was, "Wow, this must be a new discovery," because it was that massive, like bigger than the pyramids of Giza. Mind you, we're at Mars. Why are there pyramids? He also goes on to describe the color of this location. He stated that the location was like yellowish or ochre colored. He also saw a dust storm of some sort. He then travels back through time before the dust storm, noting that there are these large flat surfaces and some sort of megalithic structures. Then instructed to look for any sort of activity in the area. So at this point, he is seeing shadows of people. He stated that they're tall, slim, and very large. The shadow part adds almost like a ghostly and eerie element to this whole thing. He also stated they're wearing some sort of like tight-fitted silk material. Joseph is asked to try to go back to a time where they're fully there and not just casting in as a shadow. But then everything becomes staticky. When he tried that, he was only seeing like fragmented pieces. So he's then asked to move to a different location. He describes being inside of a canyon on Mars. He sees these steep walls that seem to go on forever, and these walls have seemed to be carved into some smooth, large structure. He describes this place similar to a rabbit warren. For the next part, he's tasked to yet again move through time. It's at this point that he sees the end of a very large road. At the end of the road, there seems to be a significant marker. He compares it to the Washington Monument. Again, he moves to different coordinates that's close to where he just was. Now he's in the middle of a huge circular basin that's surrounded by mountains. He described these mountains being extremely rugged and tall. The basin itself is also extremely large, giving him the impression that the scale is off, because everything just seems unusually large. In the next part, he describes seeing some sort of square patterns. They're laid out horizontally and vertically. He said that these squares are almost flush with the ground, meaning that they're nearly level with the surface. These were probably tiles or panels that were a part of a larger installation or building. During this session, he also mentions that the sun is weird, but the monitor didn't really care for him to elaborate on that. He ends up moving to a nearby spot. He sees a pattern that looks like roads spreading out into different spots. These roads are a little bit lower than the surrounding land, creating a network of paths. He was asked about the shape of these paths or roads or whatever. He describes them as neat, deep channels that almost go under the ground. So like old roads or paths that maybe have sunk over time. The guy controlling this session noticed that Joseph becomes, I don't know if it was anxious or unwell, but he started to lose focus during the session. And he stated that this was because all of the information and like visual images were coming in sporadically. So instead of ending the whole thing, he gives some new coordinates. And with these coordinates, he's seen like ancient pathways and channels of some sort. There was obviously a lot of previous activity in this area. He also stated that the horizon was really funny and weird and like misty. He ends up moving to different coordinates where he finds himself at a location with new pyramids. He's unsure if these are actual structures or just overlays. He's asked whether or not these pyramids have insides and outsides, and they do, and he says they're massive. He went on to explain that they're designed to be storm shelters. It's at this point that he was instructed to go inside one of these pyramids. Inside, he finds empty chambers that are devoid of any furnishings. He stated that these chambers are meant for hibernation, but not in the sense for sleeping. He clarifies that they use these to protect themselves from a terrible storm, so they hibernate away from the storm. I watched an interview with him on Sean Ryan. He explained that whenever he went into these pyramids, he's seen these beings in stasis. The monitor of the session wanted to know more about the beings who occupied this hibernation pyramid. Just like the ones he described earlier, they're slim, very tall. He was instructed to approach one and ask about themselves. and he did. He reported that they're ancient people who are dying because their time or age has passed. He described them being very determined to find a way to survive, but ultimately they could not succeed. They were apparently holding on or waiting for somebody to return with a solution. So the monitor asked what they were waiting on. Joseph responded by saying that a group had actually went to go find them a new place to live. He started receiving overwhelming impressions like the corruption of their environment. It seemed as if their environment just began to rapidly fail. The one monitoring the session asked about the cause of this environmental disturbance. It was at this point that Joseph began visualizing a globe passing through a comet's tail or a cosmic river. The imagery he had received was very cosmic and otherworldly. Before the session ended, the monitor wanted Joseph to ask the being if he knew who he was, and if there was any way he could help his current predicament. Joseph responded by saying the only thing he could get out of the being was they just must wait. This being did not know who Joseph was. He actually believed that the being perceived him as a hallucination. Joseph was asked more about how this group went to go find help. What were they operating? He described this object as looking like the inside of a boat, except larger, of course. He also described it being very shiny and made of metal. He's then instructed to follow the group. He got the impression that they went to a pretty bizarre place, filled with volcanoes, gas pockets, and really strange plants. This place was really volatile. He said it was like going from the frying pan to the fire. However, he noted that the previous location lacked vegetation, and this new place had lots of it. He also stated that the storms at the two places were different. He also described the storms at both locations being extremely different.